That brings us to verse 12. I don't allow a wife or woman to teach or to control her husband or to exercise authority over a man. Instead, she should be a quiet listener. Well, this is the main event. This is what we've all been waiting for. And I love what Christopher Hudson says. He says, this verse is the slender column that supports the entire stained glass ceiling, above which women are not allowed to rise in many churches. But the question is, what type of authority is being exercised? Is holding authority and teach one or two activities? And why do the women have to be quiet? In particular, we have to ask what authority is exercised, and that comes down to the meaning of the word authenteo. You know, is the verb there to have authority, to have bad authority? Is it a positive or neutral word, or is it negative for something like a domineer and dictate? And I got to tell you, oh man, the books, the articles on this, the technical studies of Greek language, this is deep, epic, uber Greek Bible nerd stuff. I mean, this is really deep stuff. In fact, if you go to Michael Winger's video, the most replayed part of his video is the stuff he does on this word authenteo. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not going to do 20 hours of analysis on lexemes and semantic domains and go through every possible parallel. But I'm going to make some salient points that I think will guide us, come to a reasonable conclusion that makes sense and hopefully is coherent and compelling. Okay, here's the first thing I want to say. There are lies, there are damnable lies, and then there are word studies. Word studies can often be filled with a flock of flying fallacies. I'm sure you've all heard the one about, the Greek word dunamis. I mean, it means power. It's where we get the word dynamite. So when Paul says dunamis, he means dynamite power. Mother of all fallacies. No word has a singular meaning because words change over time. Words can have a range of connotations. Lexicography is the science of studying words, learning how a word appears to function in a given context and mapping the various significations a word can have. Also, the word authenteo is a hapax legomena. This is the only place in the New Testament where it appears. It's a rare word. It's not used a lot prior to the time of Paul, and it's actually not used a lot outside of people quoting the text of 1 Timothy. I mean, it's there a bit, but it's not, raining authenteo everywhere. The other thing I have to say is that if Paul wanted to use a more neutral or an easier term for authority, he could have simply used exousia, as he does in 1 Corinthians 11:10. If Paul wanted to use a simple word, exousia, he could have just, used that, as he does in 1 Corinthians 11:10, where he is talking about men, women, authority, head coverings, Adam, Eve, Genesis. If he just wanted a simple, straightforward word for authority that everyone knew the meaning of, he could have used exousia. But Paul uses a different word in 1 Timothy 2:12 because he wants to make a different point. Remember that. Paul uses a different word because I think he wants to make a different point. And in context of 1 Timothy 2:12, authenteo is the opposite of remain quiet. A wife or a woman is to remain quiet rather than to engage in this other activity, rather than to engage in authenteo. And what's the opposite of remain quiet? Maybe it's something like bossy and boisterous. I also have to point out that if you look at some of the first English language translations of 1 Timothy 2, they are very interesting. The old King James, which is not egalitarian, it renders this text as a woman should not usurp authority over the man, which is clearly a negative meaning for authenteo. And if you go back even earlier, Wycliffe's translation is that a woman is to neither have lordship on the husband. And for Wycliffe, lordship is always negative. Okay? So some of our earliest English translations major on the theme of a negative meaning of this text. Now, if you also go through some of the major lexicons like BDAG, BRILDAG, Lewin Nida, the Del Scott Jones, you can find them all on Logos or in other places, they tend to think that this word has some sort of meaning of absolute authority or abusive authority. And I also have to tell you that a lot of lexicons point out that the nominal cognate, like the noun version, authentes, can also be used in relation to murder. Now, just imagine this for a second. Imagine you're at the office and a guy says, hey everyone, I just got off the phone with corporate. They're sending in a guy called Steve. He's going to be our new, let me just check notes, our new authentes. And when he gets here, he's going to authenteo the whole office. So when someone says to them, well, what does that mean? And then the guy says, well, it could mean that he's been appointed to take charge and he will manage the office in a responsible and even-handed fashion, or it could mean he's going to murder everyone in the building. You know, I guess we'll just have to see what happens when he gets here. But the important thing is we make sure that Steve has a nice, warm welcome when he arrives. End scene. The fact that this word can mean something akin to murder means it's probably a negative word, okay? It's probably a negative word. Now, context will always be king, but I think this word, you're on the front foot that this word is negative. Cynthia Long Westfall offers this conclusion. I think this is right. In the Greek corpus, the verb authentera refers to a range of actions that are not restricted to murder or violence. However, the people who are targets of these actions are harmed, forced against their will, compelled, or at least their self-interest is being overridden because the actions involve an imposition of the subject's will, ranging from dishonor to lethal force. Now, people look for parallels in all sorts of places, from astrology to zoology, but the best parallels are the ones which seems to have a similar usage in a similar context, like a household or a house church. There is a passage in John Chrysostom's commentaries on Colossians, or his homilies on Colossians, where he says, husbands, do not be despotic or domineer, authente, the wife, which I think is very relevant because it's a house context, similar to 1 Timothy 2. But what I think is the closest analog for Paul's usage of authentera in 1 Timothy 2 is something we find in Pseudo-Hippolytus's fragments. Okay, let me read the fragment to you, and I found this very interesting. I thought, now this is not the key that unlocks it, but this is the closest like for like I think I've been able to find. Okay, looking at a kind of a household or a house church context. This is how Hippolytus thinks it's going to go down in the last days. Wherefore all shall walk after their own will, and the children will lay hands on their parents. The wife will give up her own husband to death, and the husband will bring his own wife to judgment like a criminal. Masters will lord it over their slaves savagely. And that's where it uses the future tense of or authenteo. And in Latin, that's the word inhumani, and it says slaves will assume an unruly demeanor towards their masters. Now, Pseudo-Hippolytus is warning that in the last days, masters will authenteo their slaves very severely. And the Latin text, probably a translation of the Greek, says masters will be inhumane to their slaves. I think that's a good parallel. Okay, it's not a magical key that unlocks the meaning of 1 Timothy 2, but it's a good analog. So much like 1 Timothy 2 and similar to the New Testament household codes, the Hippolytan text here assumes a household context where this authenteo is going down, and it's very bad for slaves. Now, like I said, we can all go out and get our favorite parallels, turn them into snowballs and throw them at each other. But I'm pretty convinced that authentero and cognates are negative for the most part, even if there's going to be the odd exception. So here's my conclusion about authentero. Authentero is not just to have authority, but an intensified sense of authority, to have absolute authority, to usurp authority, to dominate with authority, and to even abuse authority. Now, the Artemision cult was also a context where civic rivalries were played out as women sought positions of status and honor in the cult of Artemis. This is where I'm going to try to apply how authentero might even have a further relevance, how it might even be magnified in the Ephesian context. In the Artemisian cult, that's the place where religion was an instrument in the pursuit of civil power. I mean, to have rank in the Artemis cult was to have social status in the city of Ephesus. Women could compete to become the Prytanis, which is a liturgical and civic appointment that was similar, Clint Arnold says, to becoming mayor of a city, and this office holder presided over the town council. It's possible that people, including the women there, especially the women, tried to authenteo their way to the ascendancy in the Artemis cult and other local cults as well. There are inscriptions about women celebrating the fact that they became the Prytanis of the city. So imagine something like a TV show called, the Artemisian version of Succession, or the Real Priestesses of Ephesus, where women are fighting to become the number one priestess, or the Prytanis in Ephesus. Okay, yeah, we know it's not a feminist cult. It's not a women-only cult. Men are involved, and people can be involved in more than one cult at the same time. But if that same spirit of rivalry in the Artemisian, and then that same habit of bossing about inferiors is played out in a home or in the church, how might Paul correct it? Probably the way he does in 1 Timothy 2:11-15.